Hi guys, it's Geekonomics here, and today I want to bring you a new playlist, and today's playlist is called Back to Basics. And what I hope to do in this little series of Back to Basics is to give you the grounding that you need so that any easy and elementary marks that are available in exam papers, you are very easily and very able to pick them up without any problem whatsoever. I've kind of been inspired to do this, having marked some of my Year 10's GCSE work over the weekend, and when it comes to the analysis and the explanation of diagrams, this is where some people go wrong quite quickly. And if you can just get this right at the outset, it will make life so much easier for you and for your teachers as you move through your economics career. So let's get to it today. So you can see here on the screen, I have got two demand and supply diagrams, very straightforward demand and supply diagrams. Here we see the demand curve shifting to the left, D1 to D2, and here we see the supply curve shifting to the right, S1 to S2. And so what I want to help you to do, and I hope to help you to understand, is how to interpret these demand and supply diagrams. I think there are four key things that you need to address when you're discussing these diagrams. You need to first of all talk about the initial equilibrium. You need to talk about whether or not there has been a shift of the curve, or both curves maybe. You need to talk about whether there has been an expansion or contraction of either demand and or supply. And then you need to talk about the final equilibrium and what's happened to price and quantity demanded and supplied overall. And so what I'm going to do is to just talk to you and to explain to you how I would go about explaining this diagram and this diagram. Before we get into that, let's just look very carefully at some of the labeling which I have here. So you can see clearly that these are micro diagrams because we've got price and quantity. You could, if you wished, put quantity demanded and supplied. It takes longer, obviously. Quantity is quite sufficient. Note clearly, please, ladies and gentlemen, the labeling of the curves. We have one supply curve, that is S1. I know that this demand curve has shifted to the left because this is D1 and this is D2. So we're moving from this demand curve to this demand curve. Now, in some of the papers which I've been marking over the weekend, people have been talking about the curves moving actually from D2 to D1, but they haven't labelled them correctly. So your labelling also helps the examiner to see that you are actually shifting the curves in the right direction. So in this case, D1 to D2. Note also, ladies and gentlemen, I have indicated on the diagram what I like to refer to as the direction of travel. So price level is falling as a consequence. Quantity demanded and supplied is also falling as a consequence. So moving to the left. And this notion of falling quantity demanded and supplied, this is something I think some people find difficult to understand maybe. Now the reason for it is, of course, if we label this as 0, our origin, when we're moving to the left, in effect the demand curve, it's moving in this direction, so it's moving more towards the origin, and obviously as it moves along this x-axis, it's moving towards 0, and therefore quantity demanded and supplied will be getting less. Okay, let's get into answering these four questions. Initial equilibrium. So I would start off my explanation by saying initial equilibrium is at point A, where price is P1 and quantity demanded and supplied, very important to put those two in, quantity demanded and supplied, is at Q1. Okay, then I think to myself, has there been a shift in one of these curves? Point number 2. There has. Which curve has shifted? Well, I know it's the demand curve, and I know that it's moving right to left because of the numbering on the demand curves, D1 to D2. So the demand curve has shifted to the left. So the next thing I'd be explaining to the examiner is precisely that. So I would be saying the demand curve has shifted to the left. Now you could give one of the examples. So this may be due to a fall in advertising spend by a company, for example. So demand shifts to the left. Now, what some of you have been tripping up on is this next point. Has there been an expansion or contraction? This is very important. And remember, an expansion or contraction arises when we get a movement which is up or down one of the curves. Not a shift of the curve, but simply a movement along one of the curves. Now we can see here that we are moving along the supply curve in this direction. Direction of travel there is, again, right to left. Now that, as you know, is called a contraction. Now what is it that's contracting? Don't get this mixed up with the shift. We know that the demand has shifted to the left, but it's not correct to say that demand has contracted because we are moving along the supply curve. So it is supply that has contracted. And how do we know it's contracted? Well, we know because any point on the supply curve here is greater than any point on the supply curve here. So we are moving towards the origin, towards zero on supply, and hence we know that supply is contracting. So that would be the next thing to point out to the examiner. Initial equilibrium, demand shifts left, there has been a contraction of supply. Note well, ladies and gentlemen. And then we simply state what the final equilibrium position is. So the final equilibrium is at point B, where price is now P2. So we could say that there has been a reduction in price. Where quantity, now very important here, remember this could actually say quantity demanded and supplied. Now it's quantity demanded and supplied which have reduced because we're now at this equilibrium position. So this is demand and this is also supply, as opposed to this being demand and this being supply. So quantity demanded and supplied have fallen. And so that's how I would go about, ladies and gentlemen, explaining a diagram like that. Let's take a look at an alternative where we've got a shift of supply and moving in the other direction. So in this instance, supply has shifted, as we can see here from the labeling, S1 to S2, and we can see that all of the direction of travel labels would reflect that as well. Price has fallen, quantity demanded and supplied has gone up. And again, I would tackle this in the same way. So, what's the initial equilibrium position? Point A. What's the price at point A? P1. What's the quantity demanded and supplied? At point A, it's Q1. Has there been a shift? Yes, there has. Supply has shifted. Now, supply has shifted to the right. So, there has been an increase in supply. Why do we know that? Because a point on this supply curve compared with a point on this supply curve is once again further away from the origin, and so there has been an increase in supply. But it has still shifted to the right. That's what's brought that about. Has there been an expansion or contraction? So have we moved along either of the curves? Have we moved along? That's the crucial thing. Yes, we have. We have moved along the demand curve. So there has been an expansion of demand here. Why? Because as we move from left to right, quantity demanded will be going up as well as quantity supplied. So there's been an expansion of demand. And then finally, our final equilibrium is at point B, where price has fallen to P2. And remember, this is the equilibrium point. So this is now the point at which demand equals supply, where quantity demanded and quantity supplied have both increased to Q2. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we go about explaining these demand and supply diagrams. So I'd like specifically as well, if you're in my Year 10 class, let's have a look over this when you get your homework back tomorrow, and let's really focus in on trying to get these very basic fundamentals, so that these are quite basic points but they're really crucial to our analysis and explanation. Okay, that's it for the first in the series of Back to Basics. Bye for now.